Round 3 of the 2014 Sinquefield Cup, the most exciting so far. Fabiano Caruana remained perfect with a 3-0 score in the strongest tournament ever by taking out world champion Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces. After Magnus sacrificed a bishop, and Fabiano's calculations were unbelievably accurate. Meanwhile, Veselin Topalov bounced back with a victory over Nakamura after the top American player missed a golden opportunity himself and suffered through the closing moments. And finally, Frenchman Maxime Vachier-Lagrave won a clean and beautiful game against Levan Aronian, and he is now tied for second place. Bravo. But it's all Caruana as we head to round 4, and it starts right now.
Hello and welcome to day 4 of the Sinquefield Cup. We've got a bit of a change of scenery as I am across the street at the World Chess Hall of Fame. This is one of 3 exhibits, the Cage and Kino exhibit. But without further ado, let's get the action started and go down to the studio.
Thank you, Taryn. And here we are, round 4 of the Sinquefield Cup, of the strongest tournament in history. As usual, we see the first player to arrive, MVL, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. He seems like he likes to be on time.
Yeah, he likes to get into the zen of the tournament.
That's right. And as we wait for the other players to arrive, we do see our buddy from yesterday, I think, there in the front row as well.
With the yellow t-shirt this time, not the green t-shirt, the
That's
young chess fan.
He's ready to write down those moves. And yesterday, of course, he was writing down one of the most exciting games in chess history. So maybe he's like our little good luck charm. That today's game will also be very exciting.
You'll have to share the story with what happened with him.
I'm Jennifer Shahade, and I'm here with Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan. And
pleasure, Jen.
We're going to be giving you all of the action for round 4 of the Sinquefield Cup like we've been doing every day. It's been just, we're running out of superlatives here because this tournament, not only is it the strongest ever, but it also, so far, is shaping up to maybe be the most exciting ever.
Well, we've definitely been spoiled so far, and I'm just fearful that the players are going to calm down instead of giving us these high wire thrills.
But on the other hand, they can't, because in order to catch Fabiano, they have to play the kind of chess they've been playing so far.
Exactly.
So maybe it's just going to lead to more of the same. Let's take a look at the standings and see how we're doing there. So we've got Fabiano Caruana, Mr. Perfect with a 3-0 score. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, 1.5. Also Levan Aronian tied for second. And tied for last, we've got Hikaru Nakamura, our US #1, Veselin Topalov coming off a win, and Magnus Carlsen, not used to being tied for last. Here he is in pain yesterday. He doesn't often look that emotional, but here...
He just had a very bad day, and Caruana had a perfect day.
That's right. And let's take a look at today's matchups. So we've got Vachier-Lagrave playing the white pieces against Nakamura. We've got Magnus Carlsen playing against Topalov. And Caruana, can he be stopped? He's going to be playing against Aronian. And hey, he beat Carlsen with the black pieces, so he gets white today. Maybe he'll increase his score to 4-0. He's going to give it a shot.
Without question.
That's right. And Grandmaster Maurice Ashley has some thoughts for us on what matchup is going to light up our screens today. All 3 again?
Well, Jen, at least 2 of them. First of all, Carlsen listed at the bottom of a tournament standing. That's pretty incredible. But he's playing against a regular customer of his of late, Veselin Topalov, who he has defeated 5 times in a row in decisive games between them recently. But of course, Topalov, a former world champion himself, coming off a victory, will have none of it, and he will be looking to try to raise his standing in the tournament. Well, it's all to play for, however, for our champion leader, that is Fabiano Caruana 3-0, an amazing score so far. He's playing against Levon Aronian, who lost a bitter game yesterday. Can Caruana go to 4-0? Well, he's playing against someone who's been tough on him. Well, 4-2, not so bad, the lead, but Caruana is looking to show the whole world that this is his coming out party. He has leapfrogged Aronian and is now number 2 in the world in the live rankings, but he is looking to show that he belongs as maybe even a number 1 contender. We will be paying careful attention to this youngster, the youngest player in the competition, as he begins his rise on the World Championship status, maybe, well, at least trying to win the Sinquefield Cup. Back to you guys.
And back to our playing hall, where we see all the players seem to have arrived, or most of them. We got Magnus Carlsen sitting down to play against Topalov. Well, this game certainly rates to be interesting. I think Carlsen, having scored so well against Topalov, is going to be kind of choosing between openings, right? They've played a lot of different openings in their various battles.
Right.
One of the most famous games that, I don't know, one of my favorite Carlsen games is that game from Tata Steel 2012. Just a dazzling sacrificial game. Started with the Bishop B5 check Sicilian.
Right.
With Knight D7.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't think he can, that kind of opening is more of a surprise value. I don't think that he can expect it to go along exactly the same lines.
Well, without question.
So probably more likely Knight E4. What do you think?
Tough. Well, first of all, Magnus lost yesterday with 1-E4, and normally chess players are a bit superstitious. You kind of get thrown off. I wouldn't be surprised if he deviated with D4. Topalov is really known as an aggressive player in the Najdorf Sicilians, and maybe it's not an area you want to compete with Veselin.
I don't think so, and that's probably why he played Bishop B5 check in that famous game, which you should check out. That was pretty dazzling, just sacrifice after sacrifice. It's the kind of game that would have fit in quite well with the Sinquefield Cup.
Oh, definitely. And Hikaru has arrived, so he's at the board. So he's playing against MVL, and their particular matchup is a very strange one. Well, although they've played each other often, they've actually only played 2 classical games with one another, and remarkably, Hikaru has won both. So this is actually a key game in the tournament standings.
That's right. Although actually Nakamura was white in both those games, so we can't really predict the opening from those. One of them, speaking of Tata Steel, that tournament, one of them was a win by Naka in that famous tournament, his kind of coming out party.
Where he won the tournament.
Yeah, he won that.
The premier group. Yeah, it was a great success, one of his best of his careers, along with winning the U.S. championships, of course.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and he said winning the U.S. championship in St. Louis that year was one of his kind of great memories. That it was the beginning, like, hey, maybe I'm going to be not just a really strong grandmaster, but an elite top 10 player. Absolutely. He definitely feels that he belongs, and justifiably so. It was about a year ago, actually. I was speaking with Sunil Wiamantri, the stepfather to Hikaru, and he was explaining that Hikaru needed to go to the next level. And I feel that he has, actually. And not only does he belong in the top 5, but he really feels himself a contender to Magnus. Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. You can't get that good without thinking about winning the World Championship, no doubt. Without I think question, that good and that young. He doesn't seem so perfect anymore. It looks like he asked Chris Bird, the arbiter, for a pen. If he was perfect, wouldn't he have his own pen? No, I think the pens are provided for them. So I'm not sure. Maybe it got displaced by a kid seeking an autograph. Well, and, the pen's not perfect. Actually, Mr. Perfect's a great name for him because not only is he 3-0 in the tournament, but he's also just such a great sportsman. Yes. You know, just seems like a real good guy and a gentleman. True, but he's off my Christmas A-list. He nominated me for the ice bucket. And I'm going to be doing that on the free day. Well, Fire and Ice, because you're also going to be doing burning boards with Glenn Kino. I know. What a day. What a day. I'll have the ice bucket experience before the burning boards at the World Chess Hall of Fame. That's right. We're referring to an art exhibition that Taryn actually showed us at the beginning of the show, pieces by Glenn Kino. And one of his pieces is not a permanent fixture, thank God. It's, in fact, just a special event in which a lot of grandmasters and artists are going to play chess with burning candles. So the idea idea is that you need to win before your candle goes out.
Right.
Kind of like life, right?
Right.
So that one is pretty interesting. I've actually played incarnations of it in the Whitney Museum in New York and in an art gallery in San Diego, and I found it quite intriguing. I don't really like fire, actually. It kind of scares me. So, because you need to get the tongs, and like I'm kind of clumsy. It could fall over. It could burn my hair.
Don't
you
hit
know.
that.
So yeah, it's kind of like I'm looking and just making sure that I'm trying not to drop the piece, literally.
Clever.
Not hang the piece, but not drop it.
A wise decision. Do not drop your burning candle pieces. As far as opening speculations go, Fabiano won a terrific game against MVL with 1e4. And I think that's what we're going to see. But what will he have prepared for Aronian's Marshall Gambit? Aronian's pretty firm defender of classical king pawn defenses, and so if he were to play e4, I suspect we'll see a Rui Marshall Gambit of some sort. So what preparation has Aronian in mind? Who knows? We'll find out.
Indeed. So we're predicting a lot of e4s today, right?
Yes.
Well, definitely Caruana, you're predicting an e4.
Mm-hmm.
Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, that one's really a toss-up. E4, D4, what do you think?
Except he just won with the white side of a D4 Catalan type of game against Aronian. Good feelings, maybe D4 on that one.
True, although he had that excellent preparation with E4. So he's 1 for 1 now. I mean, he only drew the game, but his preparation was, almost devastating, and Magnus, only by really, really digging deep and finding some great resources, was able to draw that game.
Right. And we have a comment from Maurice.
And it looks like we are just starting the game. So you were correct. I believe that Fabiano Caruana versus Veselin Topalov is starting out in the Roy Lopez. And instead of the Berlin, which would start with knight f6, which we haven't seen in this tournament, even though it's such a popular opening for so many top grandmasters,
Right.
the so-called Berlin wall. Instead, Levon Aronian played a6.
Mm-hmm. As we expected, the Marshall. And we did have, by the way, D4 by Magnus in his game with Topalov. And Levon, A6, and heading right towards his favorite Marshall Gambit. And we have a...
That's right. In another game in this tournament, remember, we saw the B5 and bishop C5.
The Archangel, what was yesterday's game, Nakamura actually had a very good opening and a great opportunity in that particular game, but he erred and lost. Today he's defending, again, classical king pawn.
Oh, and so we have two Roy Lopez's. So
We
very
have two.
thematic day. Two Roy Lopez's that aren't Berlins.
Right.
That's kind of unusual on this level.
Yeah.
Usually you're going to see at least a Berlin if you have two Roy Lopez's. So I think that's Berlin can be interesting, but getting the ladies off the board so quickly isn't very feminine. Let's keep them in there a little bit longer.
Exactly. And we do have from Magnus Carlsen's game, a Nimzo Indian with knight f3. So, setting the table early as the players just play their opening moves rather at a quick pace. Shall we get into the opening so far?
Yeah, let's take a look at the opening that seems to have gone the furthest. Oh, so so Nakamura has repeated the opening from yesterday. So he's played the bishop c5 line yet again.
The Archangel variation, which, again, he did have a good outcome in that particular opening. Just to refresh, c3 and d4 was the approach that Veselin took. Today, well, I mean, I must say, I like Maxime's preparation with white. This will not have come as a surprise to him, so I'm more than curious what he has prepared in this, what is becoming a favored defense for Hikaru.
Now, meanwhile, it looks like Fabiano Caruana has taken a prudent line and avoided the Marshall.
Yes,
So a lot of top players do that. They don't want to see the Marshall.
So let's see.
because it's so it can be difficult to play for white,
Yeah.
especially when you have the world's greatest at it playing you, who's analyzed it in such depth.
Absolutely.
So instead, trying to find a line that avoids the absolute most topical line of the Marshall.
Exactly, but there you get a situation, Jen, that's kind of funny. If you get a reputation, for example, being a great Marshall Gambit player, and everybody starts avoiding the Marshall Gambit, some of the lines where you avoid the Marshall Gambit can be basically giving you no advantage with white. Anyway, we have the classical Ruy Lopez, knight f3, castles, bishop e7, d2, d3.
So this is the way to avoid it quite early. So yeah, I didn't see that that happened. Other ways to avoid it are a4 and h3 a little bit later, but here he plays this 63 move, which we've also seen Magnus Carlsen play this as well.
Exactly. So it's a softer approach, so to speak. White hasn't given up on his ambitions of eventually establishing the classical pawn center with c3 and d4, but by delaying it one tempo, normally speaking, black then has a equal position. b5, bishop b3, castles, knight c3. So what the whole fight in the opening is about is black wants to get in this move d7, d5 as early as possible, and if white doesn't win a pawn or get something immediately as compensation, black will have equalized. So therefore we see this move knight c3 controlling the square d5.
Now that's not a move you see that often in the Ruy Lopez, because a lot of times people are reserving the c3 square for the pawn, as you mentioned earlier.
Precisely.
But knight c3 can come in handy as well. And, you know, Fabiano actually won a nice game with like a knight c3 line. It wasn't exactly this line, but I was looking at it earlier against Topalov. It was a really pretty game where he ended up like getting his knight on f5 and really occupying the d5 and f5 squares.
Oh, well, if you can do that, get a nice positional grip like that. With his last move, d7, d6, I just want to mention that black is threatening the move knight c6 to a5, getting rid of this Italian bishop on the a2, g8 diagonal. So something has to be done about that, and do we have an update as to what was played, in fact? I'm not sure. Yes, we do have more moves. So we'll go back to the position when we left it. And in order to make a little escape hatch for his bishop, Fabiano played a2, a3.
Normally that move's not necessary because you have c3 in and you can slide your bishop back to c2, but it's also kind of cool to be able to occupy the a2, g8 diagonal.
Right. And so the whole point of the a3 is just to keep the a2 square as a little retreat square for the light square bishop so that black cannot force the trade of knight for bishop. Let's see, knight a5 anyway, bishop a2, bishop e6. I wanted to say that it's always nice from black's point of view in a Ruy Lopez to get his knight out of c6 with a tempo so that he can play c7, c5. He didn't play c5 immediately, but first went bishop e6. Again, trying to neutralize this diagonal. Trades, b4, kicking the knight, and I think we're up to date with move. No, I don't think so. We still have more moves. Let me just see what more moves had been played. So b4, the knight did drop back to c6, and now the quiet little move bishop d2. Well, my first impression is that black should be satisfied with the outcome. I don't see this as being anything of major import for white at the moment. At some very near future moment, white is going to want to play a4 to try to create a weakness on b5. The big question is what would happen after a move like knight d4, occupying the center, in case of trades, knight drops back, e5. At the moment, this bishop on e7 is kind of getting buried, but this large center of pawns in the middle of the board, I like occupying the center, and I'm going to say that black is, again, he should be satisfied with the outcome of the opening thus far.
Right, and one of our typical ideas to play a4 and put some pressure on b5 and a6 is well met by c6, so you've got some extra bolstering possible there as well, since you haven't played c5 earlier.
Right. Well, you're right, that white does in many of these Ruy Lopez lines like to play a4 to create a weakness on b5. But normally, this knight is not sitting on the e2 square, let's put it that way, and maybe there's a light square bishop. So that weakness on b5 is not much of a weakness if it can't be attacked. So for example, if we were to see a move like a4 here, then for example c5, and at the moment, black's space makes me think that he should, again, be satisfied thus far. Let's take a look at the world champion Magnus Carlsen's game. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think Grandmaster Maurice Ashley has pulled up another interesting STEM game for us.
Okay.
So let's take a look at that.
Sure.
Well, we know the psychological battles that take place at this level, and one is happening right now. Magnus Carlsen has had a great result against Topalov recently, and they played as well in Norway, in Magnus's home country, in a tournament that they faced each other, and Magnus happened to draw that game with the black pieces. Well, guess what he's playing with white? Exactly what Topalov played against him. And this opening, Topalov also played against Vladimir Kramnik in the tournament and won a scintillating game. I just want to show you this position as white, the way Topalov played it. Very exciting line where Topalov got an attack against Kramnik's king, and he played this sequence, check to the king. The king ran up the middle of the board, suddenly just being chased, and then a sacrifice, vicious move, ripping off the last pawn around the king. And after knight takes, check, and the king had to move, and then he just got his piece right back and down in exchange. It's a horrible position now for black. The game didn't last too many more moves as a couple of checks, a final check, and then rook to d1, piling up the pressure on this king, and Kramnik resigned, down material, and the game about to end. That's what Topalov is thinking when he played this line with white. Well, he also played against Carlsen in this line. Carlsen played a different move. He played with d5, and this position occurred. Well, if we go to their game now, you can see that Topalov decided, I don't want to see anything of that, because clearly Carlsen has prepared looking at those games, and he has opted instead for this move, b6. Of course, another one of the popular lines here. And bishop d2, a little quiet move, guarding the knight, preventing any kind of doubling on the c3 square. And after bishop to b7, g3, looking to fianchetto his bishop. And we are standing here now. Actually, the game has moved along a bit to this position here. So a different kind of line entirely, but the psychological battle begins early as Carlsen decided to play one of Topalov's weapons against him. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maurice, for that insight. Yeah, I always find it interesting when players play their favorite weapons against the other opponent. This was something Nigel Short did in his 1993 match with Garry Kasparov, where he was literally imitating Gary's favorite openings and saying, okay, Gary, you play this variation. Show me how to beat it, so to speak.
We actually had a question from Daniel Wrench from chess.com, and he says, why do you think we aren't seeing the Berlin so much in the Sinquefield Cup? Have all the top players figured out something we don't know, or what? Well, actually, the contract for the Sinquefield Cup says that you can't trade queens before move 15.
That was clause 18. I remember that one.
And since the players don't read their contract, they're just like, okay.
No.
And then
I would answer the question as it's like fashion. Things move in and out of fashion amongst the world's top players. And at one time, the Berlin was extremely fashionable. I think that it's not that it got played out or there are any great ideas or anything like that. The players are all looking to outduel one another in the openings. And they're just on a different track right now.
But it's still, when you say fashion, it's still like a staple. I would be surprised if we don't see a single Berlin in the entire Sinquefield Cup.
Yeah,
I think there's a good chance we'll see one.
Well, for sure. I just wanted to say that this was actually one of my favorite positions as white back here. And I created a whole body of variation with queen b3. I was never particularly fond of the move bishop d2, and the lines with bishop g5, which are far more exciting, got my attention. But I like this move queen b3, as Maurice was mentioning, to avoiding the double pawns, and I got some really excellent, I had excellent results with queen b3. Actually, a couple of top players, including Veselin Topalov, by the way, have picked up Luke Van Welly and many others, have played Queen B3. The move Bishop D2 just strikes me as it's far too quiet, I want to put it that way. White really isn't playing for an advantage, a significant advantage with the move Bishop D2.
It's a kind of move that if you don't know any theory about the Nimzo, like people who are just starting to play D4 when they're, I don't know, when they're learning chess, they might play Bishop D2 because it has that natural feeling. But then when you start studying the Nimzo, you realize, well, hey, this is not something that most of the top players are doing.
Exactly.
Jan Gustafsson actually pointed out that Carlsen is the first world champion since Petrosian and Smyslov to play that Bishop D2 move. And then he hashtags it his great predecessors and hashtags it also odd move. So kind of a little bit of a passive-aggressive tweet. Like, is that a compliment or an insult? That's the best kind. You can't really tell.
I think he was trying to be factual there. It's not a great ambitious move.
Right.
But, okay, it does have poison if black reacts poorly. I would just say that against Bishop D2, I'm a little bit surprised by this decision to play Bishop B7, G3. Nothing wrong with this decision, and this is, I guess, typical Topalov being ultra-aggressive with this move C7, C5. Had he played, for example, castles, I beg your pardon, I'm sure I could get that in there, Bishop G2. Imagine black did this strange early trade of bishop for knight, and then followed it up with knight E4. Okay? This is why I don't think this move, Bishop D2, really offers white that much. If white were to play, for argument's sake, Rook C1, then after all of these trades, this trade of two pieces, I think the positions are simply balanced. I can't put it any other way than that. To say after D6, black just continues with his development nicely, puts his knight on D7, his queen on E7, and even Stevens.
Right, so you just don't think that that space advantage offers you enough of an advantage with all the pieces being traded off?
Precisely. But the move C7, C5 is an ambitious move.
And we have a different move, so it seems like what has happened? Let's
after
update
C5,
it to our
yeah,
current
after
position.
C5, D takes C5.
Okay.
C5 was played, pardon me. Let me just go back and say why this move C5. It's nice in the sense that what white has done is he's put his bishop on D2, his knight on F3 is in a pin, which has meant that the pawn on D4 is, the square D4 is temporarily not well defended. So Topalov hits the weak spot with C5. After the trade, bishop takes C5, bishop G2, castles, castles. Black is happy that he's used a C7 pawn to knock out white's central pawn on D4. Now, I think we're up to date right now, and we are. And again, we're kind of looking at this bishop on D2 and saying, what is it exactly doing there? Okay, if we were to play, for example, in this position, bishop G5, oops, sorry. Oh, it's actually black to move. I want to make a move for black. Okay, let me make a move for black. Let me play knight A6, developing a piece. Then the question is, what is this bishop on D2 doing? If you want to play bishop F4, then D7, D5 is an easy way for Veselin black to equalize.
Meanwhile, we've got Grandmaster Maurice Ashley with some more insights into the openings today.
Well, another interesting battle is shaping up in the game between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Hikaru Nakamura. Why? Because Nakamura has had experience in this line. In fact, he had a fantastic victory, if you remember, guys, from last year when we were doing commentary on the U.S. Championship when Nakamura defeated Anand in a big game. And if we could just jump to that game for a moment, this position occurred in the same line that they're playing right now, and Nakamura has great memories of defeating the then world champion by taking on F2. The game continued with a vicious attack against the black king here, against the white king here, attacking the queen, and after a check and the king had to run up the board, the queen shifted over, sacrificing this bishop on C5, but to be answered by rook to H5, winning the queen. And after just a couple of moves and queen f5, Anand had to resign. So surprisingly, maybe Vachier-Lagrave has entered the same position, well, not this same position, of course, but this same opening against Hikaru Nakamura, testing him in a line that he has pleasant memories with. I should also mention that Fabiano Caruana has also defeated Anand in this exact same line. So the top young players think that this position is good for black. What does Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, just arriving to the top 10, believe is possible here that maybe proves that thesis incorrect? We will see in the next few minutes or so in the Sinquefield Cup.
That's right. So, MBL, what is his preparation today? What's he got up his sleeve?
I think his approach to this game is, look, he wants to just play a normal opening, nothing really special, but he's achieved something. This classical pawn center is meaningful, and although yesterday I think that Hikaru was very satisfied with with the opening against Topalov. He lost it. If White can maintain the center presence of d4 in e4, it will give him a long-term edge. The question is from Black's point of view. Black has a great deal of flexible ideas. One idea is to capture and play a kind of a Benoni position. Remember, it was yesterday that this move e4, e5 got White into a little bit of a trouble. A Benoni position where this knight is going to end up moving and you play c5 and maybe you get it in d5. It is a dynamic variation and it's hard to contain Black's counterplay, but if White succeeds, then he could have a very significant advantage. And this, of course, is a big game between these two players as they're jockeying for the leadership board, of course. And
do we have some movement in Fabiano Caruana versus Levon Aronian? It looks like we have a few more moves in that game. So you didn't think much of what White was getting out of the opening with those light squared bishops traded.
No, I didn't. I didn't think that it was... well, again, when you're playing an anti-martial setup, you're not
acquiesce to get less.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And I mentioned that d6, d5 is a very standard type of move, especially if you're a Marshall Gambit expert, to play for this move. I had actually, I don't want to say championed, I had actually thought that knight d4, just occupying the center, was also a good approach by Levon. He went for the center break, d6, d5.
Lots of different ideas to get the center. I mean, that's what happens when you get an extra center pawn with f takes e6, right?
Precisely. Rook e1 with a kind of an X-ray attack by rook and knight against the pawn on e5. So Levon played queen d6, which looks a little bit strange, like the queen really doesn't seem to be well posted there. The problem for Levon is he really doesn't want to play the move d4 because then these center pawns are really rather static. He couldn't play bishop. He could play bishop d6. Pardon me. Could play bishop d6, but then the move bishop g5, increasing the pressure against the pawn on d5, is a little bit uncomfortable. Hence the less than optimal queen d6, and now knight a2. Wow. Okay, with a very unusual maneuver. I think a very unusual.
Trying to stick itself on c5, it seems like. Because,
right.
You know, one of the problems that a lot of people maybe looking at this who don't have a lot of experience in these types of structures might say, like, hey, e6 is a little bit weak, but party of one when you play knight g5.
Exactly.
Party of one that's getting ejected. So
right.
Trying to stick something on c5 and then, you know, make this a little bit more real.
Well,
but the problem is the c5 can also, the bishop on e7 can capture it after the queen moves away. So
yeah, the c5 square is looks more than adequately protected. But the maneuver, I meant to say, knight a2 to knight c1 to knight b3, boy, that takes a lot of time, and it really makes me think that after a move, for example, not the only move, but a move like a6, a5 starts begging to be played, as it's Black who's trying to create a weakness on the b4 pawn, as well as maybe getting nice activity for his rook on a8. So again, I feel that Levon
Although
is
that-
more than satisfied.
That loosens up e5 a little bit, right? Like we could take on a5 and then take on d5 and e5.
Take on a5, take on, oh, pardon me,
I'm
take on
saying
an
you
e5.
have insufficient
Right,
protection
okay.
of e5. So it's not. So things could loosen up, and perhaps knight a2 also preparing a potential c4. But we'll see. I know you don't really think white got much out of here, but
But we have a guest who's
yes,
going
we
to
do.
share his thoughts.
Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez, who's right next door at Leicester's. You guys should come on down to St. Louis and see his commentary with Ben Feingold in the Flash. And right now he's visiting us with Grandmaster Maurice Ashley.
Thanks, Jen. We're the Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez. Welcome to the show.
Always nice to be here.
First of all, this guy, Fabiano Caruana, I mean, he's playing out of his mind. What's your impression of the first 3 games he's played in this tournament?
Well, I think Fabiano, he's a very down-to-earth player. He knows that when he has a good position, he has to go for it. But he's not the type of player that really pushes things that he doesn't have to. It just happens that in this tournament, he's seen 3 awesome opportunities, and he's taking all of them. He's a player that has a combination of being very good with practical chances over the board, but he's also shown that he has excellent preparation. His second round win against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, it was definitely a combination of him playing very well, but also his studies that he's done at home.
Now, speaking of studies at home, I couldn't imagine that this position is that well studied. I mean, it looks about as boring as they come. I wouldn't even look at it too long if we didn't have to.
Actually, I have to disagree a little bit with that. This kind of positions, I had the pleasure of working with Chuchalov for my match against Tomaszewski last year in the World Cup. And Chuchalov is, of course, Caruana's second in this tournament. What I had been seeing is that this kind of structures are actually a lot trickier than they seem, especially because the computer always wants to say that it's equal, equal, equal. But the more you feed it moves, the more you come up with some interesting ideas. It doesn't really know how to defend. And the pawns on e5, on e6, even though it's so difficult to attack them, there's such a long-term static weakness that it sometimes is hard to understand, but in the long run, the endgames, they're not very pleasant for black. This move, knight a2, it's not the most impressive of novelties. It's not going to shatter this variation for black, but at the same time, he's just trying to create some practical chances in his position, hoping for a longer game and where he can exploit Aronian structure.
Do you feel that he's being a little bit cagey now, that he's gotten off to such a scintillating start? He could not have imagined a quick 3-0 start, that maybe he's kind of saying, let's just go quiet for a while and come back down to earth just a little bit?
As I said earlier, he's a very down-to-earth kind of player, and I think that had he started with 3 wins, 3 losses, or 3 draws, he would have been playing the same style.
Okay, well, let's go to someone who we didn't expect to be in last place now, Magnus Carlsen, tied for the bottom. We saw we saw the standings list, and Magnus's name was 6th on the list. I mean, it didn't have to be, obviously. He's tied 4 through 6, but still, not a comfortable place for him. What do you think is going on with his game?
Well, it's not a usual position for him. When we say that Carlsen had a terrible tournament, usually he's 3rd or 4th, never actually 6th. It's very difficult for him to be in this kind of situations. He actually needs to start winning at some point soon, and he hasn't been showing the kind of games that show us that he's going to do so very convincingly. He comes from a very bad tournament in the Olympiad, where he had very disappointing results, and more than that, he could have had worse results considering the positions he had over the board. And now at this tournament, he hasn't shown any game where we're like, oh, he missed the win or it was very close. He hasn't really had any chances. Finally, he's white against Topalov. This is very much a Carlsen type of position where he just gets rid of theory very quickly, tries to pressure him in a long game. We got this hedgehog style structure at the moment, and I think it's going to suit his purposes quite well. That being said, Topalov is a very strong player.
Do you think players are becoming less impressed by Magnus? I mean, he's won everything in the last 5 years, but do you think that maybe now that it's clear that his theoretical preparation is always almost not there because he's trying to avoid positions, that people are maybe starting to say, well, we can start hunting this guy down?
I wouldn't say that specifically. I think that Carlsen came with this unique style of pressuring people in very long-term games in positions where nobody thought that there could be an advantage. And then suddenly, a lot of people realized, hey, we can't give him this kind of positions. We have to equalize more. We have to equalize more effectively. We can't let him have this nagging edge. And I think people have figured this out a little bit more. And more than that, Carlsen himself has not been playing so well. Those positions that he was able to play like a machine every single move, he's slipping a little bit. So this combination of factors has influenced his results. But to be fair, it's only been in the past couple of months, maybe past month. We have to give him time.
They're getting old at 23, right? That's
Right.
a little bit early.
And there was a lot of fuzz last year when a lot of people saw the Sinquefield Cup and they thought, hey, Magnus Carlsen is just avoiding preparation because he has a World Championship coming up. And I don't hear this so often, but hey, he's avoiding preparation because there's a World Championship coming up. He can't be using his top weapons. He has a potential match against Anand that starts in, what, a month or two?
That's right. That's exactly a great point. Well, let's get to another game between Maxim Vachier-Lagrave and Hikaru Nakamura. And Vachier-Lagrave walked right into a game that was a memorable one for Nakamura from last year, where he defeated the world champion Anand. Why do you think that Vachier-Lagrave is just going right into that same line now?
Well, the funny thing is that although you say that MVL walked into one of Nakamura's games, it's actually uncomfortable psychologically for Nakamura to decide how to play, because he actually is not following his game against Anand. If I remember correctly, that game went with rook e8 instead of h6. And the reason that he did that is because he wants to avoid some preparation by the Frenchman. This is not the kind of player that just walks into things. The MVL is the type of player that every week he'll see every single game that was published on the internet. He'll go through every single game and see what happened. So not only does he know this game, he knows every game that happened in this variation. And surely he has some kind of preparation specifically, which is why I think Nakamura chose a similar style of setup, but not exactly the move order that he was using against Anand.
Well, we saw his fantastic preparation against Carlsen, to be sure, so far. So a rich tournament afoot. Do you feel, I'll ask you one question before I let you go, is the tournament over?
No, it's far from over. And I think Caruana himself has already proved in the past that even with a good start, he doesn't necessarily finish well. So it's up to him to prove that he can finish what he started.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez. Head back over to Lester's with those chicken wings and enjoy yourself. I know I keep talking about them. They sent some today. It was pretty good. You guys should come on down and enjoy the show. Back to you guys in the studio.
Hey, you didn't drill Alejandro for gossip. Next time.
Gossip. Huh?
And let's get right back into the games. But we are getting some good tweets at the hashtag SingCup, so I encourage you to keep those coming.
Absolutely. I did want to say that I liked what Alejandro there was explaining about the setup between Fabiano and Levon Aronian. The idea that these pawns, the pawn structure is so very strange, e5 and e6 pawn structure for black. And what we saw after queen d3, knight a2, knight d7, queen e2 is putting, well, again, indirect, direct pressure, however you want to describe it, against the pawn on e5. And Levon made a very big decision. He did play the move d5, d4, shutting down White's activity on the e file, but normally speaking, that's not a move you make lightly, d5, d4, because, again, these pawns on e5 and e6 are rather kind of stuck in place. And it does give White the opportunity of considering c2, c3.
Which is a little bit more effective than in the lines before, because remember when you had a pawn on d4, you had actually played knight to d4.
Right.
So that knight was out of the way, and c5 was easier to play.
Right, and then I had double d pawns instead of double d pawns. So a big decision here by Levon to play the move d5, d4. Having said that, it does make it easier to play the move a6, a5. You had pointed out that an early a5, there's a pawn on e5 hanging that you have to be careful about. So, big decision. I'm not sure for whom this is going to favor.
But it should be a pretty rich strategic battle, even though it doesn't have that swashbuckling nature of some of the games we've seen in the Sinquefield Cup. Sometimes this kind of battle is interesting because we really get to see how they think about long-term plans. And
right, high quality maneuvering, battle of ideas.
And we get to see what you think about that as well, because that's also always really fascinating. You know, this nickname for Fabiano, Mr. Perfect, I think it's so appropriate because not only does he have a perfect score, but it also seems like the kind of kid that people would be like, why aren't you more like Fabiano?
Our mother saying, can't you be a little bit more like Fabiano? I like that. He'll be pleased to hear that.
And we actually have a tweet that compares the two cars, Caruana and Carlsen. Christine says that his development this year is incredible. Where does it stop? Should Magnus Carlsen be worried? And the question, well, Magnus Carlsen did say that he thought that Fabiano Caruana was a very legitimate contender to be the #1 player in the world besides him, right?
Yeah, and he's looking right over his shoulder. And
I mean,
to that extent, too, Topolov himself mentioned and said, hey, listen, it's no upset when #2 beats #1. When we're talking about the...
But he was black. I feel like, Topolov he likes to maybe understate things a tiny bit.
Well,
because with the black pieces beating Magnus, I think that deserves a pat on the back.
Well, without question, of course, he recognizes a wonderful achievement. But in Vesselin's case, although we all like to be white, he really does take the approach that winning with black is totally legitimate, and it's a good result. And he's trying, white or black, to win his games, as is everybody in the tournament, don't get me wrong. So he doesn't really make that great a distinction as you and I would about the color allocation. He just thinks that, chess.
That makes sense, especially with a lot of these players avoiding early theory. And just trying to get a playable position. Certainly when you play the Bishop's opening, having white matters a little bit less than if you play an absolutely topical line like MVL played in the Scotch, or this like very theoretical thing where if black missteps for a second, he's going to lose.
Right, or Fabiano played in this advanced Caro-Kann where it's super, super, super double-edged. But in those closed positions, like we're seeing in Levon's game today, guy who outmaneuvers his opponent is likely to win. And there you go. There it is. I did want to bring to our attention, the Magnus Carlsen game, Magnus Topolov game up on our screens. Let me just go back a few moves. We had left it more or less after bishop takes c5, bishop g2, castles, and we got, as Alejandro was mentioning, a hedgehog type position. And this is where this move bishop d2, f4 was played. And again, I kind of zoned in on this bishop on d2 as not being a very effective piece, I should say. So bishop f4 was a very good idea to take the square d6 under control, maybe planting a bishop on d6, knight a6, playing to complete his development, as what Topolov has in mind is simply to centralize his knight to the e4 square with knight c5 to e4. And it is, I believe, Magnus to play. Yes. So Magnus has to come up with an effective counter to this knight maneuver, which is going to come to the center of the board. If he drops his bishop, which looks very attractive after all, to take control over the e4 square, usually what black can do is simply ignore the presence of the bishop by playing the move knight c5 with the idea of just simply kicking that bishop out of the board, out of the d6 square with the move knight e4. So the move bishop d6 does not impress. Trying to drop in with a knight, however, runs into another problem. After knight b5, trying to take over the d6 square, you've lost control over the d5 square, and the central break with d7, d5 is usually how black handles that.
Yeah, that looks attractive indeed, and then black really, all of his pieces are leaping into action.
Right.
Well, Grandmaster Maurice Ashley has some more thoughts for us on another game today, the MVL versus Nakamura game, in which MVL seems very well prepared indeed. He's playing quite quickly, isn't he, Maurice?
He has been, and as Grandmaster Ramirez pointed out, this line has been played before, but Nakamura switched to a line that Fabiano Caruana played against Anand and won in Zurich last year. So he switched up, playing in this position the move h6. And after h3, he played bishop to b7, which actually deviated from Caruana's line. Caruana played bishop to d7 in the game against Anand. But this position had been seen before, and the move rook to e1, MVL saying, I still am in my preparation, because now he's following in another world-class grandmaster, Vasily Ivanchuk's shoes. And that game that Ivanchuk won was a rapid game, but the plan went like this: d5, and after the knight dropped back, bishop takes, bishop, pawn takes, bishop dropping back to c2, and after knight bd7, the move b4, taking over a lot of space with the white pawns. And that game he ended up winning, did Ivanchuk, and that guy is a super genius, so a lot of players follow in his footsteps. Well, Nakamura decided, you know what, I don't want to see any of that, so let's go back to this moment after rook to e1, and he decided instead to play the move pawn takes pawn on d4. Now that's a different plan, see it in this position quite often, but that prevents the ready-made d5 that we just saw coming from the Ivanchuk's game. So the opening battle is afoot with these players who study all the nuances, all the past games, so that they can make improved decisions each and every time. And we now see MVL stopping for the first time to really take a deep look at this position. Maybe he's out of his preparation once again. Guys?
Thank you, Maurice. This move, e5 takes d4, as played by Hikaru Nakamura. He showed his willingness to do that in the previous round against Vesel and Topalov, so it shouldn't come as that big a surprise to Maxine that Black did what we call surrendering the center. Before this move, e5 takes d4 was played, there's this tension between these e5 and d4 pawns. And so with the move e5 takes d4, Black gives up the tension, and after the expected c5 takes d4, it goes back to what I was saying before. There's a possibility of Hikaru playing in a kind of a Benoni-like style. So for example, after knight a5 with a double attack against the pawn on e4 as well as the bishop on b3.
Don't touch that bishop. We're keeping it.
Keeping it, bishop c2 to defend the pawn. You could see a line which starts to have the contours of a Benoni after c5, d5. And again, a willingness by Hikaru to play such positions. Not that that would be the way the game may necessarily go.
But very double-edged. I mean, white with an edge on the king side, a lot of the pieces being diverted.
Yeah, well, with that big center, the classical pawn center, e4, d4, but as we saw yesterday, if white gets too ambitious, as did Vesel and Topalov, and go for early e4, e5, Black was right there with his counterplay.
Oh yeah, things can just spiral out of control. Indeed, you can lose control.
You lose control. You lose and we did see knight a5, by the way, by Hikaru. After takes, knight a5, bishop c2 looks what we call box. A nice way of saying force move.
When you say box, it's kind of like we're going to lose a lot of material if you don't play it. Whereas here, it's just like Yasser and I just like that bishop appropriately way too much. It's just an important piece.
It is.
Especially as the position continues to open up.
Exactly. A key attacking piece is bishop on b3. But not only is it a key attacking piece, this one on b3, this knight on a5 is on the edge of the board. It's out of the play. And so if you allow that bishop to get captured, well, the knight's no longer out of play. In fact, a very good trade has been made from Black's point of view. Secondly, there's no other really convenient way of defending the e4 pawn.
We just need to defend that pawn on e4
So bishop c2,
exactly.
More or less obliged. And then again, I'm not saying that c5 is the best move. Perhaps Black should even pause for a moment and take along the move rook e8, which is usually very useful in, first of all, many Benoni positions, and as well as this one, as Black pressures the e4 pawn.
Indeed. So how would you go about defending that pawn?
I don't like the move queen b1 very much, because although queen b1 does defend the pawn, it makes a very strange impression. We talk to our pieces, and we talk to that rook on a1, and the rook on a1 says, hey man, you're not giving me any maneuvering room.
Just bishop f4.
Bishop f4.
Because e5, you're losing. You could lose the e5 pawn after bishop f3.
Well, also I don't like just giving my opponent squares. I mean, there's this like
bishop f3 allows knight takes f3. It's true, but still, yeah, like you mentioned, are those squares, and then later
in the middle of the board
could be weak a little bit later.
Exactly.
Once we retreat our knight back to c6.
Right. So I'm thinking bishop f4 to simply maintain the classical pawns with and defending by the rook, that would strike me as appropriate. And if I could get the move,
tension. Although I would still look at e5 just because it does appear to me that all of your pieces are being diverted from the king side. So we have to check and see if we have some way to get in there quickly. But
right.
like if I could play queen b3, breaking the rules of chess.
Right. Then it would be a threat of mating attack on the king side. Yes.
Exactly. But I really want to keep that bishop on e3 is the problem. So I'm not so happy about. I would play knight e4 here as you suggest.
Right. With your idea of just ganging up and creating mate threats against the h7 square.
Yeah, I'm not super happy about giving up the guy on e3 though.
Well, you get your rover.
It's true, and I'm gonna have all of my pieces are gonna be geared towards the king side, so it's definitely worth looking at. But as you mentioned, just increasing the tension and leaving that move in reserve with bishop f4 is also in the cards. So lots of pleasant choices for white here, and we'll have to see what kind of counterplay Nakamura develops. Meanwhile, we have Taryn, who is with Tony Rich, the executive director here at the Chess Club, and along with the club manager, Joy Bray. Those two do so much work, along with the whole staff, to make the Sinquefield Cup a reality. So let's hear what Taryn found out from Tony about how all the magic happens. Oh, we'll get that interview with you in just a second.
We're not quite ready. We do have a development
right after we get Joy's interview.
Oh, Joy first? No. That would be great.
They say the threat is stronger than the execution. All right, and here we are, Tony Rich.
All right, thank you, Jen. I am here with Tony Rich, the executive director of the club. Now, Tony, what are some interesting things that you guys have going on right now?
You know, we keep so busy around here that it seems like every event kind of rolls into the next one. And I'm very excited to announce that in principle, we're going to have a match between Hikaru Nakamura and Levon Aronian, the world #2 player, this fall. It'll be a series of classical games followed by rapid and blitz. And it's all in preparation as Hikaru makes a run up to eventually challenge the world champion.
It's very exciting, something I'm sure a lot of St. Louisans are excited as well to have a native here in the tournament.
Absolutely. You know, it's so great whenever you see Hikaru walking down the street or eating at a local restaurant. You're like, I know that guy, and he happens to be fantastic at chess.
How cool is it to, like I said, have him here at the tournament and then have this other event with someone who is, you know, such a presence in the community?
You know, what's really exciting about it is Hikaru really is kind of a role model for a lot of our younger members here at the club. Our scholastic program teaches chess to about 2,000 kids in the St. Louis area each semester. And so all of those kids are looking at him and saying, man, I want to grow up and be just like that.
That's very cool. Well, all right, thank you, Jen. I am here with Tony Rich, the executive director of the club. Now, Tony, what are some interesting things that you guys have going on right now?
You know, we keep so busy around here that it seems like everything.
Well, it was a good interview, so why don't we have it twice?
Exactly.
Have two Sinquefield Cups. Let's just keep doing it again and again.
That is exciting news.
Big news, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember Hikaru playing a wonderful match against former world champion Ruslan Ponomaryov here in St. Louis.
That was fabulous.
And so this match between Levon and Aronian, we're going to get a taste of it actually at the
That's
end
right,
of the,
a
because
little
we have
prelude.
a 960 event between these two players.
A 960 event. And I have to say, one of my favorite commentary moments, of course, yesterday was just the pinnacle.
Yeah.
But I did really love analyzing 960 games with you at that Kings vs. Queens event a few years back.
It was wonderful.
And because you have such this great strategic mind about chess, seeing your strategic ideas when the pieces were shuffled was fascinating. Because you would think like 960, oh, that's going to favor the tactical players, but maybe it's the opposite. Because you really need to come up with like schemes for how to like coordinate your pieces rather.
And just keep in mind that in his past, in his career, Levon Aronian was the world champion. In chess 960. So and
Nakamura was.
No, Levon.
Also, right?
And no, Levon was. But remember the King of Queens tournament that you brought up. Hikaru had this unbelievable score. He scored like 9 out of 10 against the ladies. He was unfortunately just.
He was the highest rated by far.
True, and Judith didn't make the event, but that was really, really fun. I'm a little bit surprised. I want to just to bring our attention to the Magnus game for just a brief moment before we cut to a break. But bishop f4, knight a6, the move knight b5 was played, and I said the drawback behind the move knight b5 was d5, and I left it at that.
Yeah, you didn't like that at all.
Exactly, and Magnus says, well, I've got something going on here. Even though it looks very strange to just be maneuvering the knights when you haven't even connected with the rooks, the move knight e5 does open up this bishop on g2, pinning the pawn on d5. But I'm really curious as to how Magnus intends to follow up after the move knight c5. Simply bringing the knight into play, developing the, protecting the bishop on b7, preparing to give the knight the boot with a7, a6. If black can force white's pieces backwards, Vesselin, who, as we know, just loves the initiative, he may find himself with an initiative.
All right. Well, meanwhile, we've got Fabiano Caruana still in the tank after Levan's move d4. And let's take a look at what Grandmaster Maurice Ashley thinks about this position that you have in front of you.
Yes, just did a little research on this position, and it turns out that it is Hikaru is definitely deviating away from the standard lines, and he's played a move that was not normal for this position. Yasser, you made a big point about this position, the move knight to a5. It turns out that the most typical move is actually not knight a5, but is instead the move knight to b4. This move controlling the scope of this bishop, as well as threatening to come into d3, hitting the rook and hitting the pawn on b2. Typically, white has had to play the move queen b1 here in this position, and then the move c5 comes about. Well, this line is quite interesting because instead of playing knight b4, Nakamura decided on a very rarely played move. I've only found 3 examples of this in the database, the move knight to a5, and it's got Vachier-Lagrave pausing in this position, although almost certainly he's going to play what is the best looking move, bishop back to c2. And now this knight didn't do the same job of controlling this bishop. So knight b4 might have been a bit more precise, certainly a lot more topical. We'll see whether or not Nakamura has some new ideas, new wrinkle that he has by putting the knight on a5 instead of that active square b4. Guys?
Thank you, Maurice. That's a nice, subtle point, actually. A knight b4 would get you a nicer variation of a Benoni setup than what he currently has. I can only imagine that after knight a5, bishop dropping back to c2, is it possible that Hikaru wants to break in the center with a d6, d5? This doesn't
Usually
feel.
D5 allowing e5, it's bad. That's my general rule of thumb, unless you can play knight e4.
Yeah, precisely. That is exactly a general rule of thumb, that that the knight on e4, if it ends up being a weakness, so for example, we take the knight, we don't want it to live there forever, and we don't want to allow black to cement it with f7, f5. Let's say we take. So I'm trying to guess Hikaru's thoughts about this position. Does he have...
So d4 is loose at the moment.
Exactly. Does he have some...
But I would also consider playing knight h2 instead of knight d2.
As you like, but
just trying to get into g4 and also keeping d4 protected.
Right, but then Hikaru's idea of the knight on a5 having this good square c4, the knight jumps to c4 with this evil intention of actually grabbing the pawn on b2.
True, and I'm thinking like if I leap into the position with my queen, for instance, like queen g4 here.
And trying to...
Just making... things are pretty messy, but...
Set up threats over here and there.
Exactly, and I'm thinking that if you take on e3, I take back with the pawn, and it's going to be difficult for you to keep defending d5, and rather e4, sorry. Although you will have queen d5, so...
Or queen g5. I also have queen g5 opposing. The first question tricky. I might ask is how aggressive, how dangerous is this attack?
I also have rook d1.
Okay, well, rook d1 is a weird one. Just a second. Don't I have some dirty, tricky tactics here? Maybe I don't. Well, I guess I guess I'd have to start with c5, but now bishop
Now
takes
when I take on
h6.
h6, it's,
Now it's a big
you no longer have
difference.
bishop e5, right?
Yes.
And knight e5 fails to queen g7, checkmate.
That's exactly it. So maybe back in this position, if I played knight takes e5, well, first of all, you could take on d4, then maybe you want to keep all of these pieces pinned, move like queen g, yeah, maintain the mess. I don't know. This is riding the tiger a little bit for both players, right? So c5, I lose a piece, but I get 2 pawns. Knight c6, I might just end up losing material because of a pin along the d file. But it's a strange, sharp line. The players will have to calculate very deeply what's going on in this line.
So in conclusion, d5 is good unless it's bad.
Well put, exactly. That's exactly right. So I was trying to make the move knight a5 to c4 work, and the only way I was really making it work, if I can say that, was in combination with the move d5. If you play c5 right away, and then after d5, then this knight really looks lousy over here on a5. So I wouldn't recommend that as a course of action for Hikaru.
So, but instead we were pressuring the pawn in the other variation. Like when we first looked at this, you were trying to play rook e8.
Yeah, I was trying to play rook e8, but then after bishop f4, I came.
You just feel
like, what am I doing? What's my next turns? Or I see what white is doing. White would like to play rook c1, maybe dropping his bishop back after having developed his rook. I don't have a really good plan for black.
Well, maybe d5 now after bishop f4 results in some improvements, because I think after knight e4, maybe d4 hangs at the end of that variation. No, it doesn't.
No.
Yeah, you have everything holding here.
The inclusion of rook e8, bishop f4 means that white gets to control e4.
Yeah,
that's why I was trying. That's why I was trying to do it right away like this. And let's see, how did that go? We tried.
I was instead of playing knight d2, I was playing knight h2.
Knight h2. Pardon me.
Yeah, both moves seem reasonable. I was just hoping
to get something,
some immediate superiority here with like the forcing line, queen g4.
Right, and this too is not by, I mean, okay, captures on d4 may be sharp, but also this move f5, it's not very convincing. I don't think this is a convincing plus for white, thanks to the queen and rook on the f2 square. d4 is still weak. Again, some calculation for the players.
All right. Well.
Yeah, at the moment, the knight on h2 doesn't make a strong impression, a good impression.
Hey, are you trying to say knights on the rim or GM
Yes,
Yasser? Why don't you just come out and say it?
Well, that's what they've said in the past. Our great predecessors have said knights on the rim or dim.
We're saying that about knight a5 and knight h2. Well, let's take a quick commercial break as these openings heat up.
I'm Hikaru Nakamura. You're watching the Sinquefield Cup live in St. Louis.
welcome back to the 2014 Sinquefield Cup, the strongest tournament in history. So my day started off on an ominous note because I made an 8-year-old cry.
Oh, how did you do that?
Well, I asked him, he was watching yesterday the action here. Lots of young people, all ages, all over the country are coming to watch the Sinquefield Cup, and I asked him what he thought about that key game between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. And apparently the kid is a major Magnus fan, like just, it's his hero.
All right.
And I brought up a bad memory and he started to cry. And he was like, it was really disappointing.
Oh, that he lost. Oh.
Well, it's nice to see people get emotional about sports, but I felt bad that I made a kid cry, so I have to atone for it in some way.
You're just a mean person, Jennifer. This
I guess
is terrible.
that's why they call me Chess Bitch.
Oh, ouch. I actually had a nice experience yesterday. We were going out to dinner and I ran into a chess fan. He stopped me on the street, a fine gentleman from India. He introduced himself, gave me a card, explained that he was from Bombay, India, and that he had come all this way to watch the event, and he's going to be here throughout. He was staying at the Chase, the same hotel. So I ended up asking him all about chess in India, and he was so absolutely thrilled that the Indian men's team had medaled for the first time in Olympic history, and it was apparently a very serious national celebration. And all the chess fans in India were very, very proud of their Indian team. So a shout out to them for their remarkable achievement. And the idea, like you said, we're attracting people from all over the world to come as tourists and to enjoy the action, and a man all the way from Bombay. That's a real chess fan.
Well, that should make all of you say, hey, I don't really have the time to come out to the St. Louis Chess Club to watch it live at Leicester's or the Hall of Fame. I think you really should after that story.
Yes.
If somebody can come from Bombay, then you can come from Chicago or Philadelphia or
wherever it is you live.
Right, we're right in the center of the country. And Grandmaster Maurice Ashley has got something for us on one of our games today.
Well, continuing your storyline, guys, I had the same experience with that gentleman, or a similar experience with that same gentleman, Yaz, as you introduced me to him. And he mentioned that in 1995, when Kasparov played against Anand in New York City for the World Championship, that broadcast that I did commenting on that match was the first broadcast that was done, the first chess broadcast that was ever done in India. So I felt pretty special knowing that I was able to be a part of history in that country. I mean, chess is spreading worldwide. It is becoming much more popular, especially now you guys are all watching us live online, which was not available back in the day, back in the mid-90s, those ancient days. But now you see that happening, and not only that, bringing out the fans live as everyone wants to see these great players show their stuff. It's simply an incredible boom for chess in the world, as we have such great access and such natural ability to be able to present our beloved game to the fans everywhere around the world. Guys?
Thank you, Maurice. I'm looking at the game between Max and Hikaru, and it seems to me that White, first of all, Hikaru did in fact play the move Rook E8. We were debating the merits or whatnot over D5, but Rook E8, and White actually has what I think is a choice. He can play the move D4, D5, but I'm fearful that after D5, bishop takes, rook takes, C7, C6, and black will be able to swap off all of the pawns in the center and make what I think is going to be a comfortable equality.
Yeah, unless we can stick our knight into F5, but that's not quite as powerful when we don't have a bishop on E3. Of course, D5, one of the reasons a lot of times it's not desirable to play D5 is because our bishop on C2 is not as promising now that we don't have that option of playing E5 as easily.
Right.
But yeah, if we can maneuver our...
Well, the problem is the pawn on D5 is immediately under attack,
yeah, so
right?
if we take, then you take back with the knight, and knight D4 is no longer in the position, so we have to...
Right, you don't have this maneuver anymore.
So we'd have to bring our knight over to H4 to try to make it work. But
and
then
you
we'd
kind of get a
have
little rover going on over here. Well,
and we'd have to check the... Oh, you want to play knight D4?
Yeah, I'm going to be a party pooper and stop you from playing knight F5. jump in the center. I think this is a position
Not to
where...
mention the fact that you always have to check knight takes c4.
Exactly. I think this is a position that, again, black could probably be happy about. So if we go back to the move bishop f4 for a second, a move that I hadn't considered.
Just sticking the knight back to c6.
Just retreating the knight to c6, which makes a strange impression. You go knight a5 back to c6. However, you have black has accomplished something extremely concrete. In this way, he does attack the pawn on d4, and again, if he can coax the pawn to advance with d4, d5, first of all, you can step happily into the position with knight d4, again, with this break c7, c6 in mind, or you can try to be a little bit sly with this move knight b4. Maurice mentioned the idea here is to kind of drop into d3 when you're not watching.
We can't have that. We'd have to play bishop b1 here.
Right.
And then play a3.
Right. And I remember the good old days of Boris Spassky as a fabulous world champion before he lost his match. He would often make the sacrifice knight takes d5. It's a very intriguing idea by Boris. He was quite an extraordinarily gifted player, able to play all positions, universal positions, I would say, with the idea of maybe bringing your queen to f6. It's a speculative sacrifice.
Only 2 pawns.
Only 2 pawns, but these bishops, and we've seen that in a number of games in the St. Louis Cup, when you get these bishops lined up on these long diagonals, bearing down on a king, and I'm saying I would wait, of course, for a2, a3.
Well, we are threatening a3, yeah, trapping your knight. So
right, exactly. I would wait for that tempo to be played
play
before.
a5 yourself and not even sacrifice a piece.
No, I would allow the sacrifice, I'm saying, is I would play in the style of Spassky. So, for example, I play a move like queen d7, and after a3, just go for this piece sacrifice. I think it makes things a lot more fun.
Well, that's very Sinquefield Cup of you. I
Exactly.
do like your phrase, fabulous world champion. I mean, isn't that a little redundant? Can you be a world champion and not be fabulous?
Yeah, I think you can. I think you really can. I mean, I am a great admirer of Tigran Petrosian, but I wouldn't actually have described him as a fabulous chess figure.
All right, there you go.
There you go.
So there is one non-fabulous world champion being called out.
Well, he's not here to beat me up, so that's good.
But Carlsen definitely belongs in the fabulous category.
Yeah. And with this gentleman in India, by the way, who was telling me this wonderful story about Magnus had come, before his match in Chennai began, Magnus had come on an inspection visit, and Magnus had gone to a number of places, including a women's college. Well, apparently his presence really threw the college upside down, and there were literally 1,000 screaming women's fans at that college in India, and Magnus was kind of a little bit red-faced, like in awe. Is this for me? Type of deal. So that was a nice story.
Yeah, that's right. I remember hearing about the fact that he had a lot of fans in India, in fact, and not that surprising.
Right.
We do have some interesting comments that Nakamura has been playing quite quickly in the last few moves. So.
And by the way, we did see a move Queen B1, which Maxime played the move Queen B1, a move that I wasn't quite happy about. I was looking for something a little bit more effective. I pointing to that rook on A1 being unhappy. The benefit, of course, is that White is maintaining his classical pawn center. Well, Hikaru just jumped. He played knight c4, a move that it appears has a significant drawback, which is that after knight takes c4, d takes c4, knight d2, which again continuing to maintain these 2 pawns in the center, and putting immediate pressure on the pawn on c4. How is Hikaru going to equalize this?
Well, he could play d5 here, but then you have e5.
And knight d7 with the very straightforward idea of c7, c5. We'll play b3. And again, I still don't see an easy way to equality here for Hikaru. It looks to me that White has a
You're
nice
enjoying
plus.
it.
Yeah,
And
a
Maxime
plus.
did very quickly play knight takes c4.
He
And
did, in
of
fact.
course, b takes c4 instantly by Nakamura, not wanting to go down a piece.
And now we're
It's
waiting
funny
for
when,
knight d2.
when Greg and I were hosting a U.S. chess school here, and it was an all-girls edition. So
Really?
we had Ashritha, who was in the women's championship, and we had Annie Wang, so some really talented girls. But we had this game where we would guess Magnus Carlsen's moves in a game, like a
Yes.
solitaire chess type thing.
Right.
And it was we were having trouble, getting a lot of things wrong, and it was always nice when there was a forced recapture.
Yes.
Everybody would get a point.
Yes.
We would all get a point.
Finally, a forced recapture.
And even Greg was playing along. He was teaching the
The lead
lesson,
coach, yeah.
but he was using training mode in chess base.
Gotcha.
So even he couldn't see what Magnus was going to play next. And
Right.
we were all like, "What?"
Right. I must say, I had a wonderful experience, and I did it to myself just a few times before I absolutely gave up, is I did a kind of a solitaire chess of the games of Vasily Ivanchuk. I was preparing for my match with Vasily, and I would put his positions and try to guess his moves. And after getting like 12 consecutive moves wrong, I got a capture, and I was just so pleased.
yes,
It was like, yes, I finally got one move right. He was an extraordinary player, very, very hard to guess what he is doing. So I guess Max is considering the move knight d2. Does he have an alternative? Yes, he does. He can try to artificially isolate the pawn on c4 with a move I had mentioned a moment or two ago. He could play the move d4, d5, inviting the trade of bishops, and then his idea might be to again play knight d2 as well as to swing his queen over here and to try to snap this pawn on c4. Of course, if he manages all of that, he'll be winning.
All that talk of chicken wings,
Yeah.
eating pawns, eating chicken
snapping
wings.
and so on. So Hikaru still has some issues to solve, in my opinion, after both knight d2 as well as the move d4, d5. I like what...
You like White, yeah.
I like
and
White's
you know, shout out again to Lawrence Trent, IM, who will be hosting some Millionaire Chess coverage with Grandmaster Ashley.
In Las Vegas later.
That's right. Yeah, we saw a commercial for that just a few minutes ago, and he said about 30 minutes ago that MVL will put his queen on b1 very soon. Hey, that was 30 minutes ago, so it wasn't very soon.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the game between Veselin Topalov and Magnus Carlsen. And again, I see what I think might be an opportunity. Perhaps it's not there. For Veselin to seize the initiative, we had left it here, and this move knight b5 I was a little bit doubtful about, but it was his choice. d5, knight e5, knight c5. I was coming around, let me say, I'm warming up to really liking Black's position. Magnus, unperturbed, just played rook c1, a6, knight back to d4, and then I saw this move d5, d4, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, is Magnus done something egregious? But before I could possibly correct myself, there is a trick in the position.
Unperturbed, egregious. Are you trying to prepare the kids at home for their SAT test?
Oh, not just that. Tears if something were to go wrong for Magnus today. But there is a trick. There's the trick that d4 does run into bishop b7, knight b7, knight c6, and forking the queen on d8 as well as the pawn on d4. So Magnus fans can breathe easier about that one. There is one other idea, and we've seen this in numerous games of Veselin Topalov. He loves sacrificing exchanges, and
So snap on c3, huh?
just snap on c3. I don't think this particular exchange sacrifice is that good. I guess we want to take this pawn along. We got to get some. I'm thinking if Black could get in queen takes a8, but I don't think he's going to be able to.
So after queen takes d8 now,
Rook takes
if we take on c1 and make a queen, then
we'll take on f8 with check.
yeah,
Just the old Zwischenzug there.
and then you're going to be up in exchange. Yeah.
And this is completely insufficient. So the move d5, d4 is far too ambitious, and
So instead, D takes C4 has been played.
D takes C4 has been played. All right. Inviting, normally speaking, black is very happy to get rid of that Catalan bishop. A trade normally suits black just fine. The
Now
only
what
question
happens
is,
if bishop B7?
right, the only
Well,
question
now-
is, can we exploit the C6 square?
Well, if bishop takes B7, knight takes B7, knight C6 would be a nice move to get in.
Right.
Because you don't have time to trade queens because of our old intuitions that we keep talking
Knight
about.
takes E7 check
Knight
is
takes
on.
E7 check, so you'd be forced to play queen E8 here.
Now, can we exploit the fact that this knight is on C6? I don't see it. Normally,
Yeah, because we still need to recapture our pawn, right? That's a
right,
problem.
right. So-
Otherwise, we'd be happy to snap up the bishop. But
Mm-hmm.
okay, so instead we'd have to take on C4. And I think Maurice has some news for us on one of the games as well.
Well, just making some observations. You know, we have been spoiled in the last 3 days with magnificent, throat-grabbing chess. I mean, all of us on the edges of our seats as these guys went after each other. But clearly today, this has caught up with the players because the games have slowed down considerably, and now there's a lot of maneuvering going on in solid positions, a lot less risk-taking going on. In fact, the only board that has any real dynamic pawn energy that's being built up is the game between Vachier Lagrave and Hikaru Nakamura. We see in this position between Carlsen and Topalov, this move after bishop takes on b7, knight takes b7, really, he's almost forced to take on c4. Knight c6 is not going to work because there's a free pawn he has to go get back. But after b5, he's not going to have much energy in his position. And you can see the pawn structure just says stayed equality. And I think that Magnus can't be too thrilled with this position. No weaknesses at all for black. The pieces are pretty similar. This knight will fix itself in a moment, and it looks to all eyes like this position will end in a draw unless something horrible happens by Topalov. He'd have to make some really bad moves. We've seen Magnus win these kinds of positions before, but this looks equal like equal looks equal. So we don't really like the prospects here for this game. Another position, and the trade did happen in the game, by the way. Another position that looks super equal is this one. Again, the pawns are the soul of chess. Philidor said it a long time ago, back in the 1700s. If you look at the pawn formation, it is very hard to figure out which pawn breaks White's going to go for. C3 could happen at some point, but it's not saying much itself. If you look at this maneuver, rook over to b1, and then this knight dropping back, it looks as though black should be fine in a position like this as well because of the limited number of pawn breaks for both sides. C5 might happen at some point for black. You see this knight maneuver headed from f6 to d7 to b6, now going to a4. White did the same thing with his knight. So a dance of the knights in block positions, the knights tend to rule. But it's so blocked, it's so lacking in pawn energy that it's hard to imagine exactly how, even after a trade of pawns on the c file, that this is going to be much. The game to watch, of course, though, with lots of pawn dynamics is this one. Pawns are super chaotic. Pawn under threat right now, pawns in the middle. So it looks as though the one game that we did not really think of as that important for the standings or even for the day, because I guessed the last two games that I just described were the games of the day. It looks like it's going to be this one that's going to be the game of the day as it's starting to heat up right in the middle game stages. Guys?
Agreed. This does seem like
Thank
it's
you.
going to be a fascinating struggle. And
Knight d2 was Max's choice, a very
Yeah.
natural move going
rounding out
after
those
the c4.
chicken wings. Speaking of chicken wings, we've got our first 10-minute break.
Yay.
So as we get our hands dirty, you guys, we have a little puzzle for you, and that is a Nakamura victory in a critical U.S. championship win over Josh Friedel. So see if you can play like Nakamura. And we'll be right back with more from the Sinquefield Cup.
I'm Magnus Carlsen, and you're watching the Sinquefield Cup live here from St. Louis.
All right.
Big
Welcome
development.
back.
Yes, welcome back. Big developments in the Magnus Carlsen game. Magnus has gone for a pawn sacrifice, a positional pawn sacrifice for great pressure.
We'll take a quick look at that after we solve our puzzle.
Oh, sorry.
And
yes, our
luckily, that's
puzzle.
not a super long one, so we'll be able to get right back into that. Maurice, show us how it's done.
Well, we've been threatening to fire the Puzzle Meister for confusing even the Grandmasters with the last few puzzles he's had. But this one, he said, okay, I'll give you an easy one. And while we were all looking for difficult solutions, it turns out that it was a one-mover. Did you find it? I'm sure you did after we gave you that long break. The simple move, although it looks as though Black has a lot of active pieces, sometimes your pieces can get a little too active. And in this position, White plays the retreating move, Bishop to C1, and suddenly this active-looking queen is snared with nowhere to go. Game over. Black had to resign. Nakamura winning this important game in the U.S. Championship. Guys?
Right. And in terms of the puzzle, I was looking at knight f7, knight d3, knight g6. But that finally, the bishop c1 did occur to me.
Right, that backward move, right?
The old retreating backward move. Got your queen. Snared the queen. Let's see. Should I get into the...
Oh, absolutely. And of course, that game was actually took place, I believe, at the U.S. Championship. That was started out as a fried liver, actually.
Did it really?
Yeah,
well,
so
the knight on
Naka,
a5. Yeah,
right, played e45, knight f3, knight c6, and surprised everybody by playing bishop
Bishop
c4, and then just continued with knight g5 after knight f6. So.
Right, the two knights, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Nice queen snare there with bishop c1. In the game between Magnus and Veselin Topalov, essentially, as Maurice very appropriately explained, that if White was to win the black pawn on the c4 square, that the resulting position would be very even, even pawn structure, even pieces, a tame draw in the offing. Magnus did not go for that. He went for queen takes d8, rook takes d8, knight c6, forking the rook on d8 and the bishop on e7, giving up this pawn on c4, giving up an attempt to win the pawn on c4, I mean to say. And I'm suspecting, for example, a move like rook e8 here, and then rook d1. White has fine pressure for the pawn, but after, for example, a move like b7, b5, is it to his advantage? As we know, at this level, having the advantage of a pawn can be decisive.
That's right. And so if we start harassing your b5 pawn, hoping that either that or the c pawn will fall, how does that go? So let's just try playing a4.
Like a little bit of a move like a4, just a second. Let me get that on the board. Okay, a4, hitting the pawn. That looks actually like a pretty good move. My intention, of course, was to play b5, b4, attacking the knight, where the knight might retreat to b1, and then just trying to pick up this pawn on c4 looks better for white.
Yeah, you can't really defend c4, that's the problem.
So I should probably try to do something else. Maybe I should just move my bishop for the moment, bishop c5, intention of playing rook c8 to remove this knight, and only in a move or two get in the move b5. Now how would White react to that?
Let's
yeah.
see.
Again, I like the positional pressure, of course, but again, a pawn's a pawn, and you want to make sure that you don't remain decisively behind. You do have a move here, Jen, knight a4. That's a little bit of a tricky move, threatening to capture, and any recapture by the knight would be met by bishop down to d6.
Indeed, a wee bit annoying.
A wee bit annoying.
And if let's say we jump in with knight e4.
Knight e4 with a threat against my f2 pawn. I'm thinking
really
that
just
we'll
forcing you to
capture.
play a pretty good variation, where after knight c5, you can capture in the c4 at the end of the variation, right?
Right, I'm going to try to just win the pawn
be a
back
little
on
bit
c4.
better.
Well, maybe significantly better. This knight on c6 dominates the black rooks at the moment. The black rooks are huddled on e8 and f8. They don't make such a very good impression. So maybe Magnus, looking deeply into the position, found a very, and as is his wont, of course, to find positional solutions and to keep the game alive with these nettlesome moves.
Now we have an interesting question. We got some great tweets coming in at #SyncCup. You know, when I interviewed Magnus before the tournament, I asked him about his sense of humor. I really love Magnus' sense of humor, but I feel like sometimes people don't know when he's making a joke because
Right.
it's super dry,
Right.
very sarcastic, and
Right.
he's the world chess champion, so you don't necessarily expect him to be making jokes.
Right.
And he's like, he agreed with me. He said a lot of people don't get his jokes, and it's like, but he finds them funny.
I do too, actually.
So-
I like his wit.
Speaking of jokes that people don't get, we got a question. Hey guys, didn't you say that a queen freed wasn't allowed before move 18 or something in the
Yes.
Sinquefield Cup?
Yes.
They did it in move 16. And international arbiter Chris Bird has not yet intervened.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! The
A
fine.
scandal at the Sinquefield
Yes,
Cup.
fines will be meted out immediately after the round.
Of course, this was a joke. And it's not actually a terrible idea. It'd be kind of an interesting anything that just like throws a wrench in the rules.
Always has repercussions, long-standing repercussions.
I think there would be some big problems with that because you could like play an opening where the
You deliberately.
the only good way for black to equalize would be to trade queens or
Right.
something, and then it might be like a forced win for white or something, or
If you're
a
not
lot of
allowed to do it.
variations. Yeah. So that's not. That was actually just a joke because we were making fun about how unbelievably exciting the games were. It did seem almost
Right.
like it was scripted, like
Yeah.
somehow these players, came to the Sinquefield Cup purposely to play the most exciting games possible.
Right.
Whereas really, it was in a way a coincidence
Yeah.
that it just all happened at the same time, and
it-
we were the lucky recipients.
Exactly. It felt like a frenzy there, and there's no way the players could keep it up. And so this feels like such a quiet round by comparison. And it's just
Not
sort of
everybody
like,
hates it though.
No.
One person actually tweeted at us that finally some strategic battles.
There you have it. It's a tactical slugfest.
No, Grandmaster Maurice Ashley has something for us.
Well, the point of that is usually when players play in a more modern style, when they play D4, C4 classically, you're going to get more strategic battles. But when you play things like the Scotch, the bishop's opening, or the Scotch with D4, you're going to see a whole different kind of game. And those games heat up really fast. It's the evolution of chess that those kinds of openings got put to the wayside because they heated up too fast, but also fizzled too quickly, why chess seemed a bit more solid, more strategic, maybe even say a bit more boring in the more modern age. But players have figured out a way to infuse life into even those types of positions as we saw, and the players came to the Sinquefield Cup with the idea of revisiting that classical past. But I think after 3 ridiculously exciting rounds, they decided, you know what, let's go back to the solid stuff and see if we can milk small advantages. Guys?
Makes sense to me. Things had to calm down. But while things are calming down, they're also heating up. I'm looking at the game between Maxine and Hikaru. We anticipated, I should say, the move knight d2 by Maxine,
Right.
simply defending the pawn on e4 while putting pressure, immediate pressure on the pawn on c4. And a move we didn't look at because we hadn't looked carefully at the game, rook b8, a very quiet little cagey move by Hikaru, as he doesn't play.
We don't need to defend the pawn on c4 right away because we've got all this pressure on e4.
Right. And here I'm looking at an exchange sacrifice. Maxine could win an exchange, in my view, with the move bishop a4. Okay, so the idea behind bishop a4, besides obviously attacking the rook, is if you went rook d7, is to make a clamp, to try to clamp down. But I was looking at this idea of rook takes e4. No doubts whatsoever, an exchange sacrifice that Veselin would certainly consider. You get a pawn and a very good bishop on e4. And now we're seeing the benefits of having this rook on b8. So after rook b8, one move that I think Max will have to take a look at is the move d5.
Right,
Again,
trying to win a pawn rather than win an exchange.
exactly. This pawn is artificially isolated after this move d5. After d4, d5, as
Right.
black isn't allowed d6, d5.
Maybe we have a little shot here with c3. So look at this weird move.
Exactly.
Pawn. I was going to do it
Immediately.
immediately. So
Immediately.
Take with the rook.
Right, rook takes c3.
Exactly.
Correct. Right. Okay. So then takes, and again, this rook, this little cagey rook move. Look what it allows. Rook takes e3, and bishop takes d5, with a discovered attack against white's queen, and black has very good equalizing chances suddenly after this variation. So d4, d5 isn't bringing white the goods. He has to come up with something else. Borrowing a page from Garry Kasparov from his 1990 World Championship match against Anatoly Karpov, the move f2, f3 comes into consideration. This was from a Zaitsev game, by the way. The bishop, when Gary played the maneuver knight h2 and f3, it was so astonishingly beautiful and simple. Basically, this pawn structure of e4 and f3 is like a solid rock that makes this knight on f6, this rook on e8, and the bishop on b7 ineffective. In this particular situation, however, the drawback is that now that we've played the move f2, f3, counterplay by c7, c5 can explode at any moment. And I'm thinking that it's not just one-way street.
See, speaking of which, maybe we could do something even crazier. Like, I was just looking at a sacrifice there. Instead
which
of d5,
moment?
sticking our knight on d5, and then playing rook e3 and bishop d4.
Oh, you like those
I'm
tactics,
not sure if
Jen.
it quite works, though.
Knight
because-
e5, just to show what Jen has in mind, takes on d5, takes on e3, rook takes, and bishop takes d4. And thanks to this absolute pin, Jen is hoping that you'll be able to win the rook back, the piece back. And
yeah,
who knows?
and also picking up a bunch of pawns with bishop takes d5 and rook takes b2. Just kind of similar. Earlier you were sacking a piece for all these pawns
and trying
activity.
to get the rook into the game.
So f3, I think the point is, whether with d5 or with the crazier knight d5, f3, while it bolsters your center, it creates some weaknesses.
Without question.
So that black might be able to find some creative tactics against. And I was hoping that after bishop f2, like knight f4 would lead to something, but...
Right, or indeed, after bishop f2, perhaps you
Queen
can
g5, yeah.
even preface it with queen g5, going after the guy on e2. And white's just, it seems like white's a tempo or two away from getting his positional grippers over on, and the counterplay is simply coming too fast.
Well, we said it yesterday, too, that sometimes it's black who develops some really interesting tactics in a Roy Lopez because of the quick development, especially in this particular variation.
Yeah, this archangel variation where white is trying his best to neutralize these two bishops, which is what this f2, f3 was all about. But in his attempt to neutralize one bishop, he's opened up the game for the dark square bishop.
And let's go to Maurice Ashley for some thoughts on this game as well, which does seem to be the most interesting of the round.
It's heating up.
I remember that game you talked about, Yaz, very clearly. It was held in New York. It was the first game of the match, and I believe it was at the Mackler Hotel. Even, it was such a vivid memory I have of that game. It was such an instructive moment when he played that move f3. Kasparov was extremely proud of it, and he went on to win a fine game. Well, in this line, I decided to look at the move and came up with the computer's help, a crazy line. And you want to take a look at all the equalizing moves you guys were talking about. There's another move here worth looking at, d5, e5, and knight back to d7. This seems like it stabilizes white's position to have this big pawn center, but the move c5 is going to come just too fast and crack the position down. These pawns are not going to remain stable long enough, and if white tries to make sure that the base does not get knocked out from this pawn with b4, black has a fascinating, let's just say insane sacrifice. Knight takes on e5, pawn takes, and check out these pawn moves. Pawn up to d4, bishop back, pawn down to d3, attacking the bishop, threatening through to the queen, and any bishop move would run into pawn down to c3, and suddenly it's raining black pawns. So this line is not something that white wants to play. The move f3 doesn't seem to hold water for a lot of good reasons, but this one's one of the funkier ones for black. Guys?
Nice line. Thank you, Maurice, for sharing that one. And again, you see those piece sacrifices, and it's a throwback to the days of Boris Spassky, where he enjoyed sacrificing a piece for 2 pawns in the center. Okay, having said all...
Over with Magnus Carlsen, you know,
Right.
we were having trouble. At first, we weren't sure about Magnus's opening choice, but now we're having trouble figuring out how to unwiggle here as black.
And
wiggle out of it, rather.
Wiggle out of it. Well, and
Unwiggle.
Unwiggle,
I don't think
like
that's
it.
really a thing.
Well, it's trash talk. I'm going to unwiggle if you do that. H7, H6, that's Vesselin's choice. He's basically having trouble coming up with an active move. And H6, just making luft. And very oftentimes we see that this bishop on f4, well, it's not the most stable. I'm not saying that g7, g5 is necessarily a threat, but h7, h6, and he's basically saying to white, okay, I don't have a clear idea of how I'm going to improve my position. Do you have a clear idea of how you want to improve
that knight on
your
c3
position?
is not well placed. But the thing is, we prefer to move that knight, wiggle that knight around with tempo, not just like play knight b1 and then b5, a4 or something like that.
Exactly.
Well,
So
those because then when we play a4, we actually won't even be threatening to take on b5. That's the difference. When you play b5, we play a4, and it's beautiful because we're attacking it, and then you attack me, I move away, and I capture the pawn.
on c4.
And similarly, you were playing knight a4 in that line with tempo after bishop c5. So the key here is how to remove the knight in a way that will also keep the initiative. Now, speaking of Magnus Carlsen's massive popularity, I mean, I told you about the boy I made cry earlier by bringing up this game.
Where his hero lost.
Yes.
Yes,
And,
reminding him of the defeat.
well, I won't make that mistake again. But in fact, we actually have a film crew following Magnus Carlsen around
Yes,
from
I
Norway.
had an interview with the lady, yes.
And Taryn as well spoke with Norway TV. So we have that for you right now.
All right, thanks, Jen. I am here with Martin and Kaya of TV2 in Norway. They are here covering the event. And so what are your impressions of St. Louis so far?
Oh, it's a beautiful place. I'm really enjoying myself right now. It's such a nice street, and everyone is so friendly to us. It's been a great experience so far.
And this is your first trip to the Cup?
It's our first trip to the Cup, yeah, it is, and we're just amazed by this fantastic chess club that you have here. We have nothing like it in Norway, and it's just amazing what you got here.
And your viewers, you're getting a lot of great feedback from them as well?
Oh, we are. It's actually night in Norway when the tournament is going, so people are actually staying up in the night watching it, and everyone's just enjoying chess right now.
And, a big star here at the tournament and a big star in your country is Magnus Carlsen. Kind of explain to me what the fan base is there.
Well, I mean, Magnus is a superstar back home. I mean, he can't go undisturbed on the street without anyone taking his photograph. And he's a G-Star role model as well, so, I mean, there's a lot of things going around him, yeah.
And I understand, you guys are a little bit jet lagged. Like you said, it's night there. So, Magnus, maybe, do you think, experiencing some of that as well?
Well, he told me on Monday that I was feeling a little bit jet lagged, but he was getting over it, and he's been there since Sunday, so I think he's getting over it. So he's not going to be able to blame it on that if it doesn't go his way here.
Well, I know back in Norway they are hoping that it goes his way, and as you can see, we have some international coverage here at the event in St. Louis. Back to you guys.
Wow, fascinating interview there by Norway Chess.
And without question, I've witnessed it myself in numerous events, not in Norway so much, but even in Holland. Again, G-Star model, G-Star's big in Holland. And everybody just knows Magnus. Literally, he cannot walk down the street without being stopped and photographed and chit-chatted with. I mean, he can't go and get a coffee, So, the unfortunate, exactly.
I'm gonna cry.
Yeah, the effects of being a star.
Now, do you get recognized in Holland?
Pardon me?
Do you get recognized on the street in Holland?
Yes, but not anywhere near to say what those guys do. And it's sometimes it's actually quite a surprise when I do get recognized. But chess is very big in Holland, basically since the 1930s, and Max Erve being the world champion in 1935-37.
So when people recognize you, what's the best line? Ask you for an opening tip or offer to buy you a beer?
Beer. Beer works. My openings aren't that good.
Somehow a combination of the two, and both players win.
Yes, exactly. Just anything to keep the chess fans happy. That's me. I was thinking that you had been mentioning a key difference between the fact that the pawn's on b6 and b5 in Magnus's game. And I'm thinking, well, if that's so important, why not start with a move like bishop e3 and just say, hey, I'm looking at your pawn, and in case of b5, well, then I've got a4. Of course, the drawback is that I think bishop e3 is going to get met with bishop c5, and the idea is this knight on b7 is a little bit silly piece, and all you're doing is helping. So I'm looking for a good move, and I'm looking for a tweet to help me out here.
Okay, so you tried bishop e3, and then what about what about the corollary bishop c7? Does that change? What does that change?
Well,
of course, it looks quite awkward. But.
The difference is in the variations that you were mentioning after b5, b4, knight moves, doesn't matter. Let's just say I go back to here or to b1, and you want to snap this pawn. Well, the difference is that now the bishop is hanging on c7, and that might be just the tempo that black needs to equalize, and blah blah blah. So I'm trying to come up with those types of ideas. Bishop c7, bishop e3.
Trying to gain desperately kind of trying to gain a tempo here.
Right, my kingdom for a tempo.
And how about the move e4?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not too excited about playing e5 because that as you point, weakens the d3 square. It means that if you ever get your knight to d5, it's going to be home forever.
Well, if I ever get to go knight c5, knight d3, it'll be nice compensation. And again, now you have to start thinking about you got to calculate variations where the knight may end up coming to c5 quickly.
And of course, e4 will be e4 will be hanging in some of those variations
with
as
b4,
well.
right?
But I am just trying to play kind of caveman chess in the endgame and play e4, e5, and rook d7.
Right.
Just a little bit of a different tactic instead of trying to regain the c4 pawn right away.
Right. This may be one of those positions where, after exhausting all the active moves, you start and say, okay, you played a quiet move, h7, h6. Maybe I'm just going to play a kg quiet move, king g2, and give the ball back to you and say, what would you like to do, Mr. Topolov? I'll play king g2, which is an improvement. I mean, my king is actually much better placed on g2. I get out of any possible checks that and who knows, maybe one day I'll even go king f3 in an ending, and I'll start to control some nice central squares.
And wait, what did you think the right response was to e4 again?
b5, and
then if I play e5 here?
And I think that was actually one of the reasons. There is a rook d7.
Yeah, just to play rook d7.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay. So rook d7, it is definitely something I have to. In that case, I have to return the pawn immediately. I was about to say, by the way, that h7, h6 had allowed for knight h7, forgetting about rook d7. So here you do get a chance to win your pawn back, again, in the words of Walter Brown, immediately. But maybe I have knight d8, and for the moment, these pawns on light squares,
Well, I have an
all of your
unusual
pawns
double
on
attack here. Knight to b8.
Knight to b8.
That's not a double attack you see every day. I've been threatening the pawn on a6 and rook knight d7 winning the exchange.
That is attacking from a different angle, all right, but a good one, a nice one. So there's a definitive threat with the move e4. Maybe I have to come up with something a little bit better than e5. Maybe bishop c5, not an ideal move, of course, but in this way, if you go for e5, maybe I can go for, well, maybe not. I wanted to go for knight g4,
okay.
but knight e4 is more than annoying. I'll probably end up having to play knight d5 anyway.
And it does look like we have a move in Magnus Carlsen's game. It looks like we have a couple moves, actually. I think
All
that might
right.
have been the two moves that you just mentioned, e4, that we were just talking about, e4 and bishop c5 have been played.
Have been played, indeed.
And it also seems that Caruana's game might be heating up. So let's move on over to our tournament leader, who has a perfect score. Heating up, meaning that he is threatening queen takes h7 and queen h8 mate.
we
gotta at least pay attention. You never know.
Alert, red light. So let's just go back a bit. I understand that the actual, from Alejandro, that the move knight a2 was the novelty in this game. Apparently this specific position has been reached in the past. Knight a2 was not what white played. This was what Caruana played. Knight d7, queen e2, and this is how we got this position. Rook b1, by the way, deserves a little explanation. It's trying to stop black from playing getting it in a6, a5, knight b6, knight c1, knight a4, knight b3, so nice maneuvering. At the moment, this knight isn't ideal. We'd like this knight on c6 to be elsewhere, but rook f7, feinting with the idea of maybe a possible exchange sacrifice on the f3 against f3 knight, rook c1 with the idea of a potential c2, c3 break, rook d8 stopping that, knight g5. Okay, rook f6, and then the caveman, queen h5 with the threat of queen h7, h8 mate. Okay, two ways of defending the threat. One is to play rook h6, but that may allow us to sneak into f7, so we're likely forced to play h7, h6. And what is Fabiano's idea? Just to get an active queen and just to drop back with his knight, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, what else? The only
Indeed.
other...
What else? Well, again, a little caveman chess would be to go h4 with the idea of sacrificing and getting your pawn to g6 and getting a checkmate that way. But h4 looks a little bit coffee house, as we'd say about...
because you don't actually have to take on g5 for one.
Right.
Interesting, though. Yeah.
Interesting move, but okay, we would assume a retreat, knight f3, and again, I'm kind of questioning exactly what the role of this knight on c6 has done. I think that Fabiano has actually outplayed Levon.
As Alejandro said earlier, now the e5 pawn, yeah, it's just it's really pleasant for white because both of these pieces are so well situated, and you got to wonder about just a positionally caveman move like knight a5 coming, which would threaten knight b7 and threaten just knight takes e5.